Welcome to another edition of Eye on the Issues. Today we are talking with former House Speaker, former Senate Majority Leader, Eli Bebout in the Wyoming legislature. Sir, thanks for taking time to talk to us. And let's begin by talking about your political career because you had decades of that.
Yeah, that's correct, Mike. Good to see you and good to be with you today. And it actually started in the mid 80s and extended clear through almost 2020, as I recall. 14 years in the House, fortunate enough to be elected as Speaker of the House, and then 14 years in the Senate. After 12 years, fortunate enough to be elected President of the Senate. Then the last couple of years served as Chairman of Appropriations, and then retired along with my good friend Senator Hank Coe from Cody, and decided to that was enough. 28 years. It's a great thing to do if you're crazy enough to get in the legislature and serve. Wyoming's a great place to do it. It was a great career. I enjoyed it, if you can call it a career. I really think it's public service rather than a career, and that's what I really enjoyed about it. So 28 years, and here we are.
Yeah, it is public service without question. So the reason we're talking today are numerous, but one of them specifically is the idea of Wyoming being a nuclear waste storage location. I know in the past you've been involved in this. Can you tell me a little bit more about your history when it comes to this type of legislation?
Well, it's not actually nuclear waste, it's used fuel rods. And as you know a little bit about nuclear power, and of course these fuel rods are used to generate electricity. Then they're also to service our fleet of warships that we have for our Navy. And these fuel rods, when they're spent, they're only spent about 8% of their useful energy. So 92% of that fuel rod energy is still there. So I call them used fuel rods. And yes, we've looked at that for many years. And of course, when I first looked at it, it was 25 years ago. And there was a lot of pushback, obviously. And there was some safety concerns back then. Of course, that's all been, I think, run the gauntlet. And safety is not an issue any more than driving from here to home or whatever it might be. And so now I think it's time that we revisit that. Nuclear power, I've been a proponent of that for 25 years. I think it's back then it was a great idea. It's still a great idea today. And if we can have those used fuel rods stored in Wyoming for future use to do our part for the country, and this is where it's mined. You know, Wyoming for many, many years was the leading miner and producer of yellowcake, which is a byproduct of these mines that we utilize to turn into these fuel rods. So if we're gonna produce the uranium from our mines, why not have the used fuel rods come back to those original sites? Like one would be the Gas Hills area, which is east of Riverton, about 50, 60 miles. And that's an idea I had back then. It's an idea that I think makes sense now for the state of Wyoming to consider. You know, the advocates are a lot of us that understand the importance of nuclear power. And if you're talking about the least responsible in terms of putting out CO2, it's nuclear power, nuclear energy. And I just read today where Google, Amazon, and Microsoft are now looking at these SMR, small nuclear reactors, to be able to generate electricity for their data centers and all that they're doing. So it's a really important part of the mix of our energy picture going forward in our country. So why not look at these used fuel rods as a place to be here in Wyoming? The adversaries say we'll be a dump. I totally disagree with that. It's an industry. It's a good industry, and it's something that there's all kinds of spin-offs from it. And if we'd have done it 25 years ago, who knows where we might be today.
Mm-hmm. So would this be above ground, below ground? Talk about the development of safety mechanisms to make sure that the public stays safe.
These used fuel rods, when they leave the reactor after about 8% of their useful life, they're stored in huge caskets. And these caskets may vary in size, but essentially they're concrete, steel-lined caskets that have a bundle about, I don't know, I'm trying to make a picture of it, maybe this big, maybe a little bigger inside of that. And they're just actually sitting in all these nuclear power sites around our country where they generate electricity. Last count, I think there's 104 of them. So around our country, we have 104 of these sites. The idea would be to take all of that different used fuel rod, to one location in Wyoming. It would be above ground. It would be a temporary storage. These caskets would be set on end. It wouldn't take much more than, I think there's 2,300 caskets in the entire country. So if it's a 10-foot diameter casket, you can see the footprint would be very, very small. And the spinoff from all of this in terms of nuclear power is what excites me with what's going on now in Natrium, over in Kemmer, the small modular reactors, the place nuclear power is taking in the world in terms of generating electricity. All of that's positive.
And so in terms of jobs and maybe money paid to the state, how would that play out?
Well, it's all up to negotiation. You know, when we did it 25 years ago, I actually had a meeting with, I believe, the Department of Energy, and they more or less offered, and you know, this is not it was not in writing, but this was a negotiation, huge amounts of money, millions of dollars to Wyoming if we would be the lead state to try to look at how we would take care of these used fuel rods. Today, I think those numbers are out there, big numbers. There'd be revenues to the state, a tax could be charged, but to spin off the jobs created to actually locate and store and do what we're doing with the used fuel rods might be, I'm saying 400, 500, 600 employees. I'm not sure what that number would be, Mike, but the spinoffs would be huge. And that's where I think the real opportunities for Wyoming are.
Now, you've got other states out there in the past that have pushed back on this strongly. For example, Yucca Mountain in Nevada. Who do you think that Wyoming's competition is for trying to get this business?
Well, Yucca Mountain was a permanent site. And that, of course, was underground. It was in Nevada. And I have actually been on that site, and they spent, you know, what they did, the federal government put a tax on nuclear power plants, the people that bought their electricity from nuclear power plants. And that money was utilized or was going to be utilized to permanently store those at Yucca Mountain. $13 billion later, it's kind of abandoned. It's all politics. It's all it is in Nevada. I think, believe Senator Reed might have been the majority whip back then in the Senate, and it's just not in my state. Right now, I think several states are looking at it. New Mexico has a low-level site down by Carlsbad that we looked at in Wyoming, as a matter of fact. And they've been doing that for 20, 25 years. In terms of exposure, anything that would be considered dangerous, as far as I know, they've had some incidents, but there's certainly been no loss of life that I'm aware of in that particular area. So it would be an opportunity, and I think that's something that Wyoming should take a look at. The opportunities for Wyoming, you know, just maybe we could write our own check.
So for those people in Wyoming that might be a little bit leery because of things they've heard, maybe in New Mexico and other, if they've got health concerns, what do you say to allay those fears?
Well, I certainly understand the people that object to it, and they're concerned about an image. I mean, I'm a conservative Republican. Images are important, but I look at reality. And the reality of it is out in the middle of the gas hills, you know, 50 miles from Riverton, 50 miles from Casper, either side of it, 40 or 50 miles. There's just not a lot of human population out there. The image of that site out there is no less than an image of a nuclear power plant, you know, by Chesapeake Bay. You know, I've been to Cleveland Cliffs has a nuclear power plant at Chesapeake Bay, and you know where that is on the eastern shore of our country. And it's like 3 miles from a seafood, or not a seafood, but a sea village for tourism. It's not a problem. So I think the image thing could be overcome. And if you ask me if people are going to stop coming to Yellowstone Park because we have a 2-acre site in the gas hills to have used fuel rods, I say I don't believe so.
So let's talk about nuclear energy and the development of it, the move possibly in that direction in some respects, and the smaller type of nuclear facilities that you were mentioning a few moments ago. Where do you think we stand right now when it comes to nuclear? And clearly our country has been one that has backed away from that for almost 30 years thereabouts. So where do we stand now, and how do you feel about it?
Well, in full disclosure, I'm involved in that business. I'm involved with my brother. We have drilling rigs and we drill for uranium. We do that. I remember when 3 Mile Island happened, and it was just like night and day. It shut down overnight. We went from 100, 150 drilling rigs exploring and developing uranium properties to zero. So the image out there back then was huge. Of course, Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island and all those different things occurring. I think it's very safe. I really do, and I think we know what we do with the technologies there. And I'd love to have Wyoming become right now I consider Wyoming to be a huge part of our nation's energy mix: oil, gas, coal, uranium, rare earth minerals coming on, all these different things. And I like to see nuclear power become more a part of that. I think the opportunity's there. One of the concerns brought up by one of the opponents talked about in Texas, where they were thinking about it, and they were going to put it over a bunch of oil and gas wells. Well, yeah, maybe that's not a good idea. You probably wouldn't want to put a nuclear power plant over the Andreas Fault in California, although they have nuclear power plants out there. And California is now restarting their nuclear power plants. So the big light water reactors are still a part of our mix, but these smaller ones that are using sodium as the part of in order to store the electricity, store the energy, and then as the cooling mechanism, I think there's a huge potential for that. That's what Natrium's doing in Kemmer.
So when you hear these green energy proponents talk about whether it be everything from wind or solar or things like that, and then you think about nuclear, and nuclear really is clean, as long as it's safe, obviously. Do you think the country needs to take a closer look? And I know there's some movement in the direction of nuclear, but it doesn't seem like there's a lot right now, possibly because of green energy pushback. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's always going to be people that are anti-nuclear. I mean, it's easy to say no. It's easy to say that what if or this should might happen, whatever, and you say, well, look, it happened over here. Like I said earlier, I think the way we do the technology we have and how we do our reactors and how we build them, I feel very confident in the American worker to do the right job. I think green energy, if you want to call solar and wind, hydro, I think that's all part of the mix. I've never said it shouldn't be, but we all know the wind doesn't blow, the sun doesn't shine. You have to have dispatchable, reliable generation of electricity. And they want to eliminate coal, which I think is a bad idea. But if you're going to eliminate coal, and they've come a long ways in doing that, which I don't agree with at all, but then maybe the way to replace that for a while is natural gas. But they're going to try to get rid of natural gas. We know that. So nuclear has a real place in that mix. Right now, I think we're what, 21% of our electrical generation is nuclear. Coal used to be about 55, it's 35. And a lot of that's been made up with gas, but some has been done with wind and some with solar. So there's a mix there, but you need it all of the above. That's what I think.
Looking at the world, from an energy standpoint, you hear China opening coal-fired power plants, and the rest of the world is moving away from that, but China's not.
Absolutely. And I hear they're doing one a week. I'm not sure what that number is, but they're not backing off. And I never agreed in the Paris agreement that they had, and all of that, because why should the United States take a position? We're already cleaner and doing better than all of them anyway. And why should we do more as China and India do the other way? The other thing sort of is interesting about our country is, our Powder River Basin coal is pretty good coal for thermal coal. Thermal coal is what you use to generate electricity for those coal-fired power plants. The coal that they're burning in China and over there in the Pacific Rim comes from either Australia or Indonesia. It's really not even coal, it's more like peat. And it's really not a good source of coal at all compared when you look at ours. Our NOx, our SOx, all of those things are down, sulfur dioxide. Our coal should be utilized out there for those plants, and we should have that market. But guess what? Washington and Oregon won't let us have the ports to extract it, move it from Wyoming to that port and ship it over there. If they would open the ports, we could ship some of our Wyoming coal, help the entire world in terms of the amount of CO2 we put in the atmosphere and other things, but it's just not going to happen. Too bad.
So obviously you're not in the Senate or the House anymore. but I'm sure you've got plenty of connections over there. What do you know about the possibility of legislation moving through this next session in respect for the storage of fuel rods, for example?
Well, it'll be controversial, and there'll be I think it's the vocal minority against the silent majority is the way I look at it. I've always looked at it that way. Although, years ago when I ran statewide and I had said we ought to look at this, boy, I heard from the vocal minority, and they're pretty good at what they do. But I think if the legislature and it takes a governor that has to want to look at it, and that's up to a conversation with the governor now or the future governor to see what they want to do. But I think the legislature would have a positive look. It makes a lot of sense. The Minerals Committee the other day sponsored a bill. They voted to put it to draft it for the next session, but it was more of a conforming language bill. It didn't say we will or we won't, but it's a good first step. And let's see where that goes, and then see what the pulse of Wyoming is. I think you ought to have an open dialogue. I'm willing to sit down with the Powder River Basin Resource Council, the Outdoor Council, and all these people that think it's a terrible idea and talk about nuclear power. I think it's worth doing. And if you can show me where it's not safe or it's not good and all those things, I'd like to hear that. But as far as an image, I just don't share their belief about the image ruining our state. I don't believe that.
In respect to the smaller nuclear plants that they're talking about now, do you have any idea the level of output of electricity they would offer versus the bigger ones that we've been used to in the past?
Well, if you look at Jim Bridger Power Plant over by Rock Spring, it's coal-fired, of course. It's 1,500 megawatts.
Hmm.
And most typically, a coal-fired power plant would be 500 to 1,500, as would a nuclear, the light water. These SMRs are 300 to 350 megawatts. And you can stack them in, you can put them in series, so you could have two or three or four of them. There's also a smaller one that they're looking at now that you can actually carry on a 18-wheeler that can do like 30 or 40 or 50 megawatts. So that's an interesting thing going on. And who knows where this may go with nuclear power and science. And as we perform and move forward, who would have thought 50 years ago you'd even have nuclear power be part of the mix?
From being outside looking in at the next legislative session, obviously I gather this is going to be brought forward, but what other issues do you see being big in Wyoming right now from a legislative standpoint?
Well, with the onslaught from Washington, D.C. and the people that don't believe in fossil fuels, it's going to continue to be very difficult for Wyoming in terms of job generation at those levels and revenues for the state. And I believe in tourism and I believe in agriculture, and they're all very important to Wyoming, but they're not going to carry the load the minerals have in terms of funding our state, schools, government, counties, cities, all of that. So there's going to be a revenue issue. And with the movement to reduce property taxes, and I think that's something you ought to be talking about, but where are we going to get the revenues? I do not favor, never have, never will, an income tax. So I think that's a big issue that they have to deal with. The new people, the new regime, whatever, the Freedom Caucus, whatever they are, that's going to evidently have the power in the House to do what they want to do there. Good luck. It's one thing to point the finger at the guy in the chair, but now they are going to be in the big chair. So they have to have a plan for Wyoming. I'm interested to see what their plan is. How are you going to deal with revenues? How are you going to deal with the decline in coal, oil, gas? What do they think about nuclear power? That could be a part of the mix to help with revenues. So there's a possibility there. That's the thing. And then, we do, we're a conservative state, but maybe not as conservative as a lot of people think we are. Maybe there's some ways we can trim some budgets. I don't really necessarily agree with across the board cuts. Maybe they do that. But look at programs we really don't need. So they're going to have a full plate, both the Senate and the House. It'll be interesting.
Will be interesting is correct. So I've got to ask you this final question that I ask most of my interviewees. What do you like most about Wyoming?
Oh, have you got 10 minutes?
I
I'm
got
a
10
native.
minutes.
I'm a native. My mom and dad were natives. My dad was born in Buffalo, mom in Hudson. My grandpa and grandma came over from the old country. It's Wyoming it's just Wyoming is just a wonderful place. I love the outdoors. I love to hunt and fish. I believe in that, but I like the opportunities for good paying jobs. I like the fact that we're not overly crowded, but I think we need to grow. I wish that we had a couple of cities, Cheyenne, Casper, that were 100, 150,000. But I like the attitude of Wyoming people, can do attitude, love our country, patriotic, conservative. It's a great place to be, a great place to raise your children. I'm going to live here the rest of my life, hopefully for a while. And I'm just proud to be part of Wyoming. And the neat thing about it, I hope that it never changes in the public service side of it, we keep the legislature as public servants. If we become a full-time legislature, like a lot of states have, then it becomes a career. Bad idea. And you look at the states in our country that are, in my opinion, going the wrong way, and you know who they are, the West Coast, the East Coast, they have full-time legislature. It's a career. They're always out there campaigning to keep their job. I did it as public service, and that's what I hope we continue to do. And Mike, it's great to call myself a Wyoming native.
I bet. Eli, thank you for talking to me. And so folks out there that are watching this, if you want to find out more about Wyoming Liberty Group, just go to wyliberty.org, sign up for our newsletter. Eli, thank you again.
Yeah, nice job. Anytime you want to visit about this, and we'll see where it goes and be interesting.
I'll follow up. Thank you, sir.